In the freezing black water under the Arctic ice, there swims a killer whale that has hunted down almost everything the ocean can offer. Orcas have taken down great white sharks. They have taken down blue whales, the biggest animals to ever exist. They hunt in teams, they plan, and they almost never lose. But 300 feet below the ice, one shark swims past them, and they let it go. This is the Greenland shark. It moves slower than you walk to school. It cannot outrun anything. It cannot outfight anything. Yet somehow the ocean's smartest killer treats it like it is invisible. Today we dive into a poison bottle disguised as a fish, a 500-year-old survivor older than your country, and a secret orca hunting trick that changes everything you thought you knew about this standoff. If this kind of ocean mystery pulls you in, hit like and subscribe before we go under. Hold your breath. We are going down. Picture the ocean's most feared hunter, a creature so smart it plans ambushes, so strong it can knock a great white shark unconscious with a single hit. Orcas rule every ocean on Earth. They hunt in teams. They share tricks with their young like family secrets passed down at dinner. Nothing in the sea is safe from them, except one thing. Far below the Arctic ice, in water so cold it would stop a human heart in minutes, a massive grey shape drifts through the dark. It barely moves, it does not fight, it does not flee. And somehow the ocean's greatest killer swims right past it. This is not a story about fear. Orcas do not get scared the way you or I do. This is stranger. This is a stalemate between two ancient survivors, one built for speed and teamwork, the other built to break the rules of biology itself. To understand why orcas leave this shark alone, you first need to understand exactly how dangerous orcas really are. Because once you see what they are capable of, the mystery gets a lot bigger. Orcas are not whales. They are the largest member of the dolphin family, which means they are fast, clever, and built like torpedoes made of muscle. A full-grown orca can weigh 6 tons, about the same as a large school bus packed with kids. They can burst through the water at over 30 miles an hour, faster than most cars drive through a neighborhood. But speed is not their scariest weapon. Their brains are. Orcas hunt in pods, family groups that can include grandmothers, mothers, and calves. And these pods do not just chase prey, they plan. Scientists have watched orcas spread out in a V-shape like fighter jets flying in formation, each orca covering an escape route so prey has nowhere to run. Other orcas herd fish into a tight spinning ball near the surface, then slap the ball with their tails to stun dozens of fish at once. It looks less like an animal attack and more like a military operation. Then there is the sound. Orcas can produce clicks and calls louder than a rock concert, over 200 decibels, loud enough to physically stun smaller animals in the water. They use this sound to build a 3-dimensional map of everything around them, even in pitch-black water. They can tell the size, shape, and even the inside structure of an object just from the echo that bounces back. It is like having X-ray vision built into your ears. With tools like these, orcas do not just hunt fish and seals, they hunt other predators. They have taken down great white sharks twice their own size, flipping them upside down to trigger a strange paralysis called tonic immobility, then feeding while the shark cannot move. They have attacked blue whales, the largest animals to ever live on this planet, animals 4 times the length of a school bus. Packs of orcas have brought down whale sharks too, the biggest fish in the entire ocean. There is almost nothing swimming in salt water that an organised pod of orcas cannot eventually take down, which is exactly why the Greenland shark should not stand a chance. It cannot outswim an orca, it cannot outfight an orca. By every normal rule of the ocean, it should already be extinct. But it is still down there, drifting through the freezing dark, completely untouched. To find out why, we need to go meet this shark, and the deeper you look into it, the stranger this story gets. 7,000 feet down. No sunlight. Water so cold it hovers just above freezing. Most animals cannot survive here at all. But something does, and it has been surviving here for a very, very long time. Meet the Greenland shark. Locals call it the ghost shark, and once you see how it moves, you understand why. This shark grows up to 18 feet long, roughly the length of a full-size pickup truck. That makes it one of the largest sharks in the entire ocean, rivaling the size of a great white. But here is the twist. While a great white can hit speeds of 25 miles an hour when it attacks, the Greenland shark moves at less than 1.5 miles an hour. That is slower than you walking down a school hallway. Scientists once assumed a creature this size, this slow, must only scavenge dead animals off the ocean floor. Then they found seal remains, and even parts of polar bears, inside a Greenland shark's stomach. That discovery confused everyone. How does the slowest large shark in the ocean catch a seal, one of the fastest swimmers in Arctic waters? Some scientists think the shark ambushes sleeping seals resting near ice holes, moving so slowly it barely disturbs the water, sneaking up like a shadow instead of a hunter. It survives not by chasing, but by patience. Total, complete patience. And patience is something this shark has more of than almost any other animal alive. The Greenland shark lives in nearly total darkness, in water that would give a human hypothermia in minutes. Its body has adapted in an extreme way to survive that cold and crushing deep sea pressure. Its cells are packed with a special chemical that stops them from being crushed under the immense weight of the ocean above, and stops them from freezing solid in near zero temperatures. That chemical is the key to this entire mystery. Remember it, because it comes back later, and it changes everything about how we understand this shark. For now, picture the scene. A giant slow grey shape gliding through pitch-black water, closer to a ghost than a predator, alive in a place that would kill almost anything else on Earth. Most Greenland sharks carry strange yellow parasites clinging to their eyes, which may leave them partly blind. It does not seem to slow them down. In this world, sight barely matters. Time is the only thing that matters, and this shark has more time than you can imagine. Some Greenland sharks alive in the ocean right now may have been swimming through that darkness since before your country existed. Before cars, before telephones, possibly before the printing press reached parts of the world. We will get to exactly how old this shark can grow in a few minutes, and the number is almost impossible to believe. But first, we need to understand the one secret that might explain everything. The reason a giant apex predator like the orca, a hunter that fears nothing, seems to leave this slow, half-blind shark completely alone. It has to do with what happens if you actually try to eat one. Here is a strange fact. If you caught a Greenland shark right now, cut off a piece of its meat and ate it raw, you could end up stumbling, dizzy and confused, almost like you were drunk. In extreme cases, people have described symptoms close to a seizure. Sled dogs in Greenland have eaten this meat and been unable to stand afterward. Locals have a nickname for the feeling. They call it being shark sick. This is not folklore. This is real chemistry, built directly into the shark's body. Remember that special chemical we mentioned? The one that helps the shark survive crushing pressure and freezing cold? It is called trimethylamine oxide, and scientists usually just call it TMAO. Deep sea animals use TMAO like a shield. It stops their proteins from collapsing under intense pressure, thousands of feet down where the weight of the water above would crush a human submarine. But the Greenland shark carries an extreme amount of it, far more than almost any other creature in the ocean. And when that shark dies, or when its flesh gets broken down during digestion, TMAO changes into a completely different chemical called trimethylamine, or TMA. TMA is the compound responsible for that harsh, ammonia-like smell you get from spoiled fish left out too long. In the Greenland shark, there is so much of it packed into the meat that it becomes genuinely toxic. On top of that, this shark's tissue is loaded with ureum, a waste chemical that breaks down into ammonia after the animal dies. Combine high TMA with high ammonia, and you get flesh that can poison the animal eating it. Now picture this from an orca's point of view. An orca does not know chemistry. It cannot read a warning label, but evolution does not need warning labels. Over thousands of years, a species learns what to eat and what to avoid, sometimes through instinct passed down in the pod, sometimes through direct experience. If eating a slow, toxic shark leaves you dizzy, disoriented and vulnerable in open water, that is a lesson written directly into survival itself. And for an animal like an orca, disorientation is not a minor inconvenience. It could be the difference between life and death. Here is why. Unlike a fish, an orca has to breathe air. It has to surface regularly to fill its lungs, track its pod, and stay aware of its surroundings in cold, moving water. If a toxic meal left an orca confused or unsteady even for a few minutes, that brief window could be dangerous, especially in icy Arctic seas where a disoriented animal can drift, lose its pod, or struggle to reach the surface in time. In other words, the Greenland shark may have evolved the ultimate defense. Not claws, not speed, not teeth, a body that punishes anything that tries to eat it. But here is where the story takes an unexpected turn, because scientists have discovered something that suggests orcas may not just be avoiding this shark out of instinct, they may actually be outsmarting it. Before we get to that twist, you need to understand exactly how much time this shark has had to build its defences, because the number is almost too strange to believe. In 2016, a team of scientists in Denmark tried something that had never been done on a shark before. They used a method called radiocarbon dating, normally used on ancient bones and fossils, and applied it to the lens of a Greenland shark's eye. Eye lenses grow in layers, a little like tree rings, and the very centre layer forms before the animal is even born. That centre never changes again for the rest of the shark's life. It becomes a frozen time capsule. When scientists tested the oldest shark in their study, the results stunned marine biologists around the world. That shark was approximately 392 years old, give or take about 120 years. Even at the lowest possible estimate, that shark was over 270 years old. At the highest estimate, it may have been alive for more than 500 years. Let that number sink in for a second. If the middle estimate is correct, this shark was likely born sometime in the early 1600s. That means it was already swimming through Arctic waters before the United States existed as a country. Before the telephone, before the light bulb, possibly before your own country's government was formed. While kingdoms rose and fell, wars were fought, and empires collapsed on land, this shark just kept drifting through the same dark, freezing water. This makes the Greenland shark the longest living animal with a backbone known to science, beating out every whale, every tortoise, every other creature that has ever been studied. How does an animal live that long? The answer connects directly back to everything we just learned. Greenland sharks grow incredibly slowly, adding only about half an inch to their body every single year. Compare that to a great white shark, which can grow multiple inches in a single year. At that snail's pace, a Greenland shark does not even reach adulthood until it is around 150 years old. Imagine being a teenager for a century and a half. Scientists believe this insanely slow metabolism is directly connected to the shark's survival in extreme cold. Everything about this animal runs in slow motion, its growth, its movement, and likely its aging process too. Less activity means less damage to cells over time. Less damage means a much longer life. It is almost as if the Greenland shark traded speed for time. While other predators live fast and take risks to grow strong quickly, this shark chose the opposite path. Move as little as possible, waste no energy, let centuries pass instead of years. And that strategy appears to be working better than anyone imagined. Now picture an orca pod encountering a creature like this, not just poisonous, not just slow, but an animal that has already survived longer than entire human civilizations, quietly perfecting its defenses generation after generation, or in this case, century after century. That is a lot of evolutionary testing to work against, and it sets up the next question perfectly. If this shark is such a perfect poison-coated survivor, how exactly did scientists ever catch orcas anywhere near one of its closest relatives? To understand what happens next in this story, we need to fully understand exactly what kind of hunter we are dealing with. Because orcas are not just strong, they may be one of the smartest predators on the entire planet. Their hunting starts with sound. Orcas send out rapid clicks that bounce off everything around them, then listen for the echo. This is called echolocation, and it lets them build a detailed picture of their surroundings using sound alone, even in complete darkness. They can tell an object's size, shape, and even peek inside its structure just from how the echo returns. Some research suggests they can produce these clicks up to 500 times a second while chasing fast-moving prey, adjusting their aim within a fraction of a second every time their target changes direction. That is faster than the human eye can track a moving ball. But the real advantage is teamwork. Orcas live in pods, tight family groups built around mothers and grandmothers who often lead the group for decades. When they hunt fast prey like dolphins or porpoises, they spread into a V-shaped formation almost identical to fighter jets flying in attack position. Each orca takes a slightly different position, covering escape routes so prey has nowhere left to run. Researchers have recorded pods holding this exact formation at speeds over 30 miles an hour for chases lasting half an hour or more. When hunting schools of fish, some orca pods use a method called carousel feeding. They circle a school of herring, gradually pushing the fish into a tight, terrified ball near the surface. Then working together, they slap their powerful tails into the ball, stunning dozens of fish in a single hit. It takes patience, timing, and trust between every orca involved. One mistake and the fish scatter. And these are not instincts every orca is simply born knowing. Scientists have documented older orcas, especially experienced females, actively teaching younger pod members how to hunt. Techniques get passed down like a family trade, refined slightly with each new generation. A calf does not just inherit its mother's genes, it inherits her hunting knowledge too. This is how orcas manage to take down animals that seem impossible to beat. A great white shark alone is a terrifying predator, but an orca can flip that same great white upside down, triggering a strange frozen state called tonic immobility, where the shark's muscles simply lock up and it cannot move or fight back. Blue whales, the largest animals ever known to exist on Earth, 4 times longer than a school bus, have been attacked and killed by coordinated orcapods. Whale sharks, the biggest fish in the ocean, have suffered the same fate. Nothing about the Greenland shark's size should protect it from a predator capable of all this. So if it is not too big, and if instinct alone might not fully explain why orcas avoid it, there has to be something else happening. Something orcas have apparently already figured out about the Greenland shark's poisoned defense system. And the clue comes from a completely different ocean thousands of miles away, involving a shark that is basically the Greenland shark's twin. Halfway around the world, off the coast of the Pacific Northwest, lives a shark almost nobody has heard of. It is called the Pacific sleeper shark, and it is essentially the Greenland shark's cousin. Same slow, drifting movements. Same enormous size, capable of growing well over 15 feet long. Same deep, freezing habitat far below where sunlight can reach. Even the same toxic chemical defense built from high levels of TMAO and urea in its flesh. If orcas avoid the Greenland shark because of its poison, you would expect them to avoid this nearly identical cousin too. Instead, researchers observing offshore orca pods documented something nobody expected. The orcas were hunting Pacific sleeper sharks, deliberately, repeatedly. But here is the detail that changes the entire story. The orcas were not eating the whole shark. Scientists tracking these hunts noticed strange purple, fatty lumps floating to the surface after the orcas made long, deep dives. When researchers collected samples and ran DNA tests on them, the results were clear. These lumps were shark livers. Specifically, the livers of Pacific sleeper sharks, pulled cleanly out of the body. Think about that for a moment. These orcas were not attacking randomly and eating whatever they could tear off. They were targeting one very specific organ, and apparently leaving the rest of the toxic body behind. Why the liver? The answer comes down to simple math. A sleeper shark's liver can make up an enormous portion of its total body weight, in some cases close to 20%. For a shark weighing around 1,100 pounds, roughly the weight of a small car, that liver alone could weigh over 200 pounds. That is packed with energy-rich fats, similar to nutrient-dense fuel, without needing to consume the rest of the shark's toxic flesh. A single liver like that could provide enough food for several adult orcas in one sitting. This changes the entire picture of what might be happening with the Greenland shark too. Because if orcas figured out how to extract just the liver from a toxic sleeper shark cousin, avoiding the poisoned meat entirely, then maybe the story with the Greenland shark is not simply about fear or avoidance. Maybe it is about precision. If a hunter as intelligent and coordinated as an orca can identify exactly which part of a toxic prey animal is safe to eat, and exactly which part to avoid, that is not an animal running away from danger. That is an animal solving a puzzle. And if that is true for the Pacific sleeper shark, the question becomes obvious. Has something similar ever been documented with actual Greenland sharks? Or is this whole idea still just an educated guess based on a closely related cousin? The answer is more complicated than you might expect, and it depends on something almost nobody considers when they picture the Arctic. Here is where this story gets genuinely tricky, and where a lot of the videos and articles floating around the internet start blending two separate animals into one simple explanation. The Greenland shark lives mainly in the North Atlantic and Arctic Ocean, in places like the icy fjords near Greenland, Norway and Iceland. The Pacific sleeper shark, the one orcas were documented hunting for its liver, lives across the Pacific Ocean, near places like Alaska and the coast of Japan. These are two different sharks, living in two different oceans, thousands of miles apart. They're closely related. Same family, nearly identical bodies, sizes, and slow drifting lifestyles. Even similar toxic chemical defenses built from TMAO and urea. But they are not the same animal, and that detail actually matters here. So does this mean the entire idea of orcas targeting a Greenland shark's liver is just a myth? Borrowed from a different species entirely? Not exactly. Scientists studying sperm whales, a completely different giant predator that also dives deep into freezing water, have found Greenland shark remains inside sperm whale stomachs. That tells us at least one massive ocean predator is capable of preying on this specific shark, toxic flesh and all. Researchers investigating the Arctic have also recorded strange high-speed swimming behaviour in Greenland sharks immediately following underwater hunting sounds from large predators nearby, almost like the slow, sluggish shark suddenly found a reason to move fast for the first time in its life. That detail alone should surprise you. Remember, this is an animal that normally drifts along barely faster than a person walking. If something in that dark water is capable of making a Greenland shark suddenly panic and burst into a rare high-speed swim, that tells you something serious is happening beneath the surface. Something is dangerous enough, even to a giant ancient survivor, to trigger real fear. So here is where the honest science currently stands. There is strong, confirmed evidence that orcas are intelligent and coordinated enough to selectively hunt organs from a toxic shark relative in the Pacific. There is separate evidence that other massive Arctic predators are capable of preying on actual Greenland sharks, toxic flesh included. But a confirmed direct video of orcas specifically extracting a Greenland shark's liver in the Atlantic has not been captured yet. At least not that scientists have publicly documented and studied in detail. That does not mean it is not happening. The Arctic Ocean is enormous, dark, freezing, and almost impossible to observe consistently. Scientists still know shockingly little about what happens hundreds of feet below that ice, especially involving animals as elusive as orcas and Greenland sharks. What we do know is this. Somewhere in that relationship between two of the ocean's most extreme survivors, one built for speed and intelligence, the other built for poison and patience, there is a standoff still playing out today. And whether it ends in outright avoidance or in a hunting technique refined enough to strip away danger and leave the poison behind, one thing becomes clear the deeper you look into this mystery. The Greenland shark did not survive 500 years by accident, and an animal smart enough to hunt blue whales is not going to stay confused by a slow-moving shark forever. Off the coast of Nova Scotia between 1993 and 2001, something strange started washing up on the beaches. Nearly 5,000 dead seals, their skin torn away in a tight spiral pattern, almost like someone had peeled them the way you peel an orange in one long strip. No one knew what was doing it. Scientists eventually landed on a suspect nobody expected: the Greenland shark. Researchers gave the mystery predator a nickname that stuck: the corkscrew killer, and it forced scientists to rethink everything they thought they understood about this slow, drifting animal. For years, most people assumed the Greenland shark was mainly a scavenger, a giant garbage disposal cleaning up whatever sank to the ocean floor. That belief made sense on the surface. This is, after all, one of the slowest swimming sharks ever recorded, moving at less than 1.5 miles an hour. Compare that to a ringed seal, which can burst through open water at speeds several times faster. On paper, a Greenland shark chasing down a healthy seal sounds about as likely as you catching a sprinting cheetah on foot. Yet when scientists cut open the stomachs of Greenland sharks, seals kept turning up. Not just old, rotted seal parts either. Some remains looked fresh, with no sign of the tiny scavenging creatures that usually swarm a dead body within hours underwater. That detail bothered researchers. If the shark was simply finding seal corpses that had already been dead for days, those bodies should have been crawling with scavenging invertebrates. Instead, some remains looked like the seal had died recently, possibly right there in the shark's jaws. So how does the slowest big shark in the ocean catch one of the Arctic's fastest swimmers? The leading theory involves something every predator eventually learns. You do not need to be fast if your prey is not moving. Seals spend a surprising amount of time resting near breathing holes in the sea ice, or drifting just beneath the surface while asleep. A Greenland shark's mottled grey skin blends almost perfectly into the dark, murky water below. Scientists believe the shark may drift upward at its slow, silent pace, using the cover of darkness and camouflage to close the distance on a sleeping seal without ever needing to sprint. By the time the seal senses danger, the shark is already close enough to strike. It is not a chase. It is an ambush built entirely on patience. This single discovery reshapes the entire way we should picture the shark. It is not simply drifting through the dark, waiting for scraps to fall from above. In at least some cases, it is actively stalking Javoy prey, using stealth instead of speed, silence instead of aggression. Stomach content studies back this up in stunning detail. Scientists examining sharks near Svalbard in the Norwegian Arctic found seal tissue inside more than a third of the sharks they studied, including both seal pups and full-grown adults. This was not just an occasional accident. This looked like a regular part of the shark's diet, and once you accept that this ancient, poison-filled giant is a capable, calculated hunter and not just a passive scavenger, the entire relationship with orcas starts to look different too. Because now we're not talking about one slow animal and one fast predator simply avoiding each other by chance. We are talking about two apex hunters, each using a completely different strategy to survive in the same brutal, freezing world. And that sets up the real question at the heart of this whole mystery. When two apex predators like this cross paths, who actually holds the power? Imagine two rulers of the same freezing kingdom, each holding a completely different kind of crown. One ruler moves in packs, plans ambushes with military precision, and can flip a great white shark upside down like a toy. The other ruler barely moves at all, wears no armor, and has no claws or venom. Yet it has survived in the same brutal waters for centuries longer than any written history we have. This is not a story about one predator being weak and the other being strong. This is a story about two completely different survival strategies, developed independently, both somehow reaching the very top of the Arctic food chain. Orcas represent one extreme: speed, intelligence, teamwork, and raw physical power. They dominate through action. Every hunt is a coordinated event, a plan executed by multiple minds working together in real time. Their strength lies in what they can do right now, in this exact moment. The Greenland shark represents the opposite extreme entirely. It survives not through action, but through inaction. It wastes almost no energy. It grows so slowly that a single inch of length can take years to develop. Its strength lies not in what it can do, but in what it can endure and what it can survive being eaten. When you place these two philosophies side by side, something becomes obvious. They were never really competing for the exact same resources in the exact same way. Orcas typically chase down fast, active prey, seals, fish schools, even other whales, using speed and coordination that a slow shark simply cannot offer as a hunting challenge. There is no thrill in chasing something that barely moves. The Greenland shark, meanwhile, thrives specifically in the kind of dark, deep, freezing water that keeps it away from most competition entirely, feeding on whatever drifts down from above or whatever unlucky seal it manages to ambush in near total darkness. In a strange way, these two apex predators may have simply carved out separate corners of the same enormous kingdom, largely avoiding direct conflict not because either one fears the other, but because neither one needs to fight for the same territory. But nature rarely stays that simple for long. Food is not unlimited, even in an ocean this vast. And when resources run low, or when curiosity gets the better of an intelligent, opportunistic predator like the orca, the boundaries between these two kingdoms can start to blur. That is exactly what appears to have happened on the other side of the planet, in the icy waters near the Pacific coast, where scientists first captured solid evidence of orcas crossing directly into the sleeper shark's world. And once that boundary broke in one part of the ocean, it raised an enormous question for every other part of the ocean too. If orcas can learn to hunt one toxic, slow-moving giant shark, what stops that exact same knowledge from eventually spreading to every orca population on Earth, including the ones swimming through Greenland's icy fjords right now? The answer to that question depends on something most people never think about when picturing killer whales. It depends on culture. Here is something that separates orcas from almost every other predator in the ocean. They are not just animals following instinct. In many ways, they behave like a species with culture. Different orca pods around the world hunt completely different prey, using completely different techniques, even when they live in overlapping waters. Some pods specialize almost entirely in fish. Others specialize in hunting marine mammals like seals and even other whales. These are not different species. They are the exact same species, Orcanus orca, yet they behave like entirely separate societies, each with its own traditions. Scientists believe the explanation comes down to teaching. Older orcas, especially experienced females, spend years actively guiding younger pod members through complex hunting techniques. A calf does not simply wake up one day already knowing how to herd a school of herring into a spinning ball or how to flip a great white shark into paralysis. These are learned skills, refined and passed down within a family group, generation after generation, almost like recipes handed down at a family dinner table. This detail is the missing piece that makes the sleeper shark discovery so important. When researchers observed offshore orcas extracting livers from Pacific sleeper sharks, they were not just documenting one lucky, one-time event. They were documenting the emergence of a learned technique, one that could spread through a pod, then potentially through neighbouring pods, exactly the same way carousel feeding or wave washing techniques have spread through orca populations elsewhere in the world. In fact, similar shark hunting behaviour has already been observed spreading. In 2022, scientists filmed a group of 5 orcas working together to hunt sharks, a technique that appeared to be passed along within that specific population over time. This tells us something critical about how orca knowledge moves. It does not stay locked inside one single animal's brain, it travels. So picture the timeline. First, one curious, hungry orca pod encounters a toxic sleeper shark near the Pacific coast. Through trial, error, or sheer intelligence, they discover the liver is both safe and incredibly nutritious, packed with more energy than nearly any other part of the ocean's food web. That knowledge does not disappear with a single hunt. It gets taught. Calves watch. Calves learn. Eventually, an entire pod carries this specialized skill forward for generations. Now, stretch that same possibility across the globe, into the icy Atlantic waters where actual Greenland sharks live. If sleeper sharks and Greenland sharks share nearly identical toxic defenses, nearly identical body structures, and nearly identical vulnerable, energy-rich livers, there is no biological reason the exact same hunting strategy could not eventually be discovered, or may already exist quietly, undocumented somewhere in those freezing Atlantic fjords. This is where the mystery stops being a simple story about fear and starts becoming a story about time. Because the real question is no longer whether orcas are capable of overcoming the Greenland shark's poison defense. The real question is whether they already have, hidden somewhere beneath ice that human scientists have barely begun to explore. Here is a number that puts this entire mystery into perspective. Scientists estimate that more than 80% of the ocean remains completely unexplored and unmapped by human eyes. Now factor in that the Greenland shark lives in some of the most extreme, least accessible parts of that already mysterious ocean, water up to 7,000 feet deep, locked under Arctic ice for much of the year, with temperatures hovering just above freezing. This is not an animal swimming through a busy coral reef where tourists snap photos every day. This is an animal living in one of the most difficult environments on the planet to study. Think about what that actually means for scientific research. Most of what we know about Greenland sharks comes from a small handful of sources. Bycatch, meaning sharks accidentally caught in fishing nets meant for other species. Occasional tagging expeditions, where researchers attach tracking devices to a shark for a brief window of time before it vanishes back into the dark. And stomach content studies, essentially detective work performed after a shark has already died, piecing together clues about its life from whatever remains undigested inside it. Direct observation, actually watching a Greenland shark hunt, feed, or interact with another predator in real time, remains incredibly rare. One marine biologist who has spent years tracking these sharks with acoustic tags admitted that despite dozens of promising hypotheses, no one has definitively proven exactly how these animals hunt seals in the wild. The mystery in his own words, still remains unsolved. If scientists still cannot fully confirm the basic hunting habits of the Greenland shark itself, imagine how much harder it becomes to document a rare, possibly occasional interaction between this shark and an entirely different apex predator like the orca, especially somewhere as remote and difficult to access as the high Arctic. This is exactly why the connection to the Pacific sleeper shark discovery matters so much. Scientists were not looking for orca and shark interactions when they first found those strange, purple, fatty lumps floating to the surface. They stumbled onto it almost by accident, thanks to unusually persistent researchers who happened to be tracking a specific pod of orcas during a research expedition, then took the extra step of collecting and genetically testing what they found floating nearby. That kind of accidental discovery is often exactly how science advances in extreme environments like this. Nobody sets out expecting to find proof that an apex predator has cracked the code on hunting a 500-year-old, toxic-filled shark. It happens by chance, through years of patient, expensive, difficult fieldwork in some of the harshest conditions on the planet, which means the honest answer to whether orcas hunt actual Greenland sharks in the Atlantic right now is simply this. Scientists do not fully know yet, not because it is not happening, but because almost nobody has been in the right place, at the right depth, at the right moment, with a camera or a research vessel ready to witness it. And that uncertainty is not a disappointing dead end. It might be the most exciting part of this entire mystery, because it means the real answer is still out there, waiting in the dark. Let's step back into the shark's own body for a moment, because there is more happening inside a Greenland shark than just toxic flesh. Its entire biology reads like a checklist of extreme survival tools, each one solving a problem that would kill almost any other animal. Start with blood. In freezing water that hovers just above the point where salt water itself begins to freeze, a normal animal's blood would thicken dangerously, slowing circulation to a crawl. Scientists studying deep sea sharks like this one believe specialized proteins and chemical compounds in their blood and tissue help prevent this kind of dangerous freezing, allowing normal functioning conditions that would be lethal to most warm-blooded creatures on Earth and even deadly to many other fish. Then there is pressure. 7,000 feet below the surface, the weight of the ocean pressing down is roughly 200 times greater than what you experience walking around at sea level. That kind of crushing force can literally collapse the proteins inside a normal cell, breaking down the delicate structures needed for life. This is exactly where that TMO chemical earns its keep, acting like a molecular shield that keeps proteins stable and functional even under that immense weight. Combine extreme cold resistance, extreme pressure resistance, and a nearly toxic level of built-in chemical defense, and you start to understand why almost nothing successfully preys on adult Greenland sharks in the wild. It is not one single defense keeping this animal alive. It is layer after layer of extreme adaptation, stacked on top of each other, each one solving a different life-threatening problem specific to life in the deep Arctic. Now compare that to the environment an orca actually thrives in. Orcas are warm-blooded mammals. They need to regularly surface to breathe air. They rely heavily on precise, complex hunting behaviors that require agility and speed, and their entire biology is tuned toward an active, energetic lifestyle. An orca chasing prey through freezing water at high speed is burning enormous amounts of energy every single second of that chase. A Greenland shark offers almost the exact opposite hunting experience. No chase, no agility contest. Just a slow, drifting target wrapped in a body built specifically to punish anything that eats it carelessly. This mismatch may explain something deeper than simple avoidance. It may explain why, if orcas do target this shark at all, the smart move would never be a typical high-energy chase. The smart move would be exactly what scientists already documented with the Pacific sleeper shark. A careful, targeted extraction, taking only the safest, most valuable part of the body and leaving the rest of that poisoned ancient survivor untouched in the dark. That strategy would require patience, precision, and intelligence far beyond simple brute force hunting. And it raises an uncomfortable question for the Greenland shark's 500-year winning streak. What happens if the ocean's smartest predator eventually solves this puzzle completely? For centuries, the Greenland shark's greatest advantage may not have been its poison at all. It may have simply been silence. Think about how rare human contact with this animal actually is. Fishermen occasionally pull one up by accident. Scientists occasionally tag one during a short research trip. But for the overwhelming majority of its multi-century lifespan, a Greenland shark drifts through total darkness, completely unseen, completely unheard, completely unmonitored by any outside observer. That kind of isolation has protected it in ways that go far beyond chemistry. If almost nothing witnesses this shark's interactions with other predators, threats can develop and disappear without ever being recorded. A hunting technique could be discovered by one orcapod, used successfully for years, and never once get documented by a single research team, simply because nobody happened to be watching at the right depth, in the right fjord, at the right moment. This cuts both ways though. It means the Greenland shark's 500-year survival record might be even more impressive than we realise, having weathered whatever hidden dangers exist in that darkness, without human evidence to prove exactly what those dangers were. But it also means we cannot say with total confidence that this shark has truly never faced a serious predator. We can only say that no one has caught it on camera yet. There is one more wrinkle worth understanding here. Even if an orcapod does eventually crack the code on hunting Greenland sharks, that alone would not immediately threaten the species with extinction. Consider how slowly this species reproduces. Females do not even reach reproductive maturity until they are roughly 150 years old. Once mature, their reproductive rate remains extremely low compared to faster-growing shark species. That means even a species this ancient, this well-defended, is fundamentally fragile in one very specific way. It cannot recover quickly from population loss. A species that takes over a century just to reach adulthood cannot simply bounce back the way a fish that matures in a single year can. Every single Greenland shark lost to hunting, whether by fishing nets, environmental changes, or eventually by a predator that learns to bypass its toxic defenses, represents a loss that takes generations, sometimes centuries, to replace. This is precisely why marine biologists worry more about this species than its terrifying poison might suggest. Being difficult to eat does not make an animal invincible. It simply changes what kind of threat can actually hurt it, and that shifts the entire emotional weight of this story. This is not really a tale about who wins a fight between two apex predators. It becomes a story about how a 500-year-old survivor, immune to nearly every physical threat the ocean can offer, remains genuinely vulnerable to something far quieter and far slower than any orca attack. Time itself, and how slowly this ancient species can recover from any disruption at all. Let's flip the entire story around one more time, because there is a version of this mystery that deserves serious consideration too. What if orcas are not avoiding the Greenland shark out of caution at all? Orcas sit at the very top of the ocean's food chain, with no natural predator of their own anywhere on Earth. Nothing hunts a healthy adult orca, not sharks, not other whales, nothing. This apex position shapes how orcas approach nearly everything in their environment. Unlike smaller prey animals constantly scanning for danger, orcas move through the ocean with almost total confidence, because for them, genuine danger from another animal essentially does not exist. Given that fearless nature, it becomes harder to imagine an orcapod cautiously avoiding a slow, drifting shark purely out of instinctive fear, the same way a smaller fish might avoid a predator by pure reflex. Fear, as we understand it in faster, more vulnerable species, may not even be the correct lens for understanding orca behaviour here at all. A more accurate explanation might simply be efficiency. Orcas expend enormous amounts of energy during a typical hunt, especially when chasing fast, agile prey like dolphins or seals through cold water at high speed. Every hunt is essentially a calculated trade, energy spent versus energy gained. A Greenland shark, from a pure calorie standpoint, does not offer much of a reward relative to the risk and effort involved. Its body is packed with toxic compounds throughout most of its mass. Extracting a safe, valuable portion like a liver requires additional time, precision, and possibly specialized technique that a pod would need to learn and practice. Compare that to hunting something like a seal or a school of herring, where nearly the entire animal provides safe, immediate nutrition without any specialized extraction process required. In other words, orcas may simply have better options most of the time, not fear. Simple, efficient decision-making, the same kind of practical calculation a smart predator makes constantly throughout its life. Why work harder for a complicated, partially poisonous meal when easier, safer prey is often available nearby? This theory does not contradict the sleeper shark discovery either. It actually strengthens it. If a specific orca population happened to encounter a shortage of easier prey, or happened to develop the specific knowledge needed to safely extract a toxic shark's liver, the calculation could shift entirely. Suddenly, that complicated, difficult meal becomes worth the extra effort, especially given how much energy a single liver can provide. This reframes the entire relationship between these two predators in a completely different light. This was never really a story about a mighty predator being intimidated by a slow, harmless-looking shark. It is a story about calculated risk, opportunity, and the constantly shifting balance between effort and reward that shapes every decision a wild predator makes. And that balance can shift at any moment, especially as the Arctic itself continues changing faster than almost anywhere else on the planet. The Arctic is warming faster than almost any other region on Earth. Sea ice that used to stay frozen most of the year now breaks apart earlier each spring. Water that stayed reliably freezing for centuries is shifting, degree by degree, and that shift is rippling through every single relationship in this ecosystem, including the one between orcas and Greenland sharks. Orcas were once mostly blocked from large parts of the high Arctic, simply because thick sea ice made it too dangerous for an air-breathing mammal to travel through. An orca needs open water to surface and breathe. Push too far under solid ice, and there is a real risk of becoming trapped with no way to reach the surface in time. For centuries, this natural barrier likely kept many orca pods away from the deepest, coldest fjords where Greenland sharks spend most of their lives. That barrier is disappearing. As Arctic ice retreats earlier and forms later each year, scientists have already documented orcas expanding into Arctic waters they rarely entered in the past. More open water means more access. More access means more opportunities for these two ancient predators to cross paths in places that used to keep them naturally separated. This is not a distant, hypothetical future scenario. It is already happening, tracked through satellite data and direct sightings across multiple Arctic research stations. Marine biologists studying this shift have expressed real concern about what expanding orca territory could mean for species that evolved in relative isolation for hundreds of years, species like the Greenland shark, which built its entire survival strategy around living somewhere few predators could reliably follow. If orca populations gain consistent access to Greenland shark territory for the first time in centuries, that changes the entire equation we have been exploring throughout this story. It is no longer just a question of whether orcas are physically or chemically capable of overcoming this shark's defenses. It becomes a question of exposure and opportunity, the simple, repeated contact needed for a smart, adaptable predator to eventually study, learn, and refine a new hunting technique. Remember, orca hunting knowledge does not stay locked inside one single encounter. It spreads through teaching generation after generation, exactly the way it apparently did with the Pacific sleeper shark on the other side of the world. Give orcas enough repeated exposure to a new potential prey animal, and history suggests they eventually find a way to exploit it, even prey that seems impossibly well defended at first glance. This means the 500-year standoff between these two predators may not stay stable forever. The very climate conditions that once protected the Greenland shark by keeping it isolated in remote icy waters are now the exact same conditions beginning to erode that protection. An ancient survivor, built by centuries of extreme adaptation, now faces a genuinely new kind of threat. Not a stronger predator, a more accessible one. Step back from the ice, the poison, and the hunting theories for a moment, and this story becomes something bigger than just two animals in the Arctic. It becomes a lesson about what survival actually looks like, and how differently it can be achieved. We tend to picture survival as a fight, claws against claws, speed against speed. The strongest, fastest, sharpest animal wins, and everything else gets left behind. Orcas fit that picture perfectly. They dominate through action, intelligence, and raw physical capability, checking almost every box we associate with a top predator. The Greenland shark checks none of those boxes, yet somehow it has outlasted almost every rival on the planet for over 5 centuries. It never needed speed. It never needed teeth sharp enough to challenge an orca. It built something far stranger, and, in some ways, far more effective. A body that turns the very act of being eaten into a serious risk for the predator involved. That is not weakness. That is one of the most unusual defensive strategies found anywhere in the animal kingdom, and it forces us to rethink what strength really means in the natural world. Strength is not always about winning a direct confrontation. Sometimes strength means making that confrontation not worth having in the first place. There is another lesson buried in this story too, one about patience. In a world, and honestly in a culture, that often celebrates speed, urgency, and constant action, the Greenland shark represents almost the exact opposite philosophy. Move slowly, waste nothing, let time itself become your greatest advantage. While faster animals burn through their lives in a matter of years or decades, this shark stretches a single lifetime across centuries, quietly outlasting empires, wars, and entire eras of human history, without ever needing to prove its strength through a single dramatic act. And yet, as we have seen throughout this story, no defense lasts forever unchallenged. Even a 500-year winning streak can eventually meet a predator patient enough and smart enough to study it, learn from it, and find the one narrow gap in its armor. The very same intelligence that lets orcas dominate nearly every other corner of the ocean may eventually be the thing that finally cracks this shark's ancient defense completely. That tension between an old, seemingly untouchable survival strategy and a newer, endlessly adaptable intelligence sits at the heart of nearly every major shift in the natural world. Species that seem invincible for centuries can still face entirely new pressures they were never built to handle. Change, whether from a smarter predator or a warming ocean, does not respect how long you have already survived. The Greenland shark has already outlasted almost everything the ocean has thrown at it. The real question left is whether it can outlast what comes next. Here is where this story actually stands today, stripped of speculation and dramatic guesswork. Orcas are, without question, one of the most capable predators to ever exist in the ocean. They have proven themselves against animals many times their own size, using intelligence, teamwork, and raw physical power that few species on Earth could ever hope to match. Nothing about the Greenland shark's size, strength, or speed should logically protect it from an animal this dangerous, yet it remains protected anyway. Part of that protection almost certainly comes from the shark's toxic flesh, a defense built from centuries of extreme adaptation to some of the coldest, deepest, most crushing water on the planet. Part of it may come from simple efficiency, orcas choosing easier, safer meals over a complicated, partially poisonous one. And part of it may come from something even simpler than either of those explanations: isolation. For most of history, these two predators may have rarely encountered each other at all, kept apart by ice, by depth, and by sheer geographic distance. What we know for certain is this: on the other side of the planet, orcas have already proven they are capable of solving a nearly identical puzzle, learning to extract a safe, nutrient-rich liver from a toxic, closely related shark cousin, while apparently leaving the dangerous flesh behind. That discovery alone proves the Greenland shark's defense is not truly unbreakable. It proves that given enough time, curiosity, and generational teaching, even a 500-year-old chemical shield can eventually be studied and worked around by a predator smart enough to figure it out. Whether that exact same breakthrough has already happened quietly in the icy fjords near Greenland, hidden from human eyes in water almost nobody has ever filmed, remains one of the true unanswered mysteries of the modern ocean. And as Arctic ice continues retreating, opening new water to orcapods that historically avoided these extreme northern regions, the opportunity for that exact discovery grows a little more likely with each passing year. So the next time someone tells you orcas simply avoid the Greenland shark, remember what we now know. This is not really a story about one predator being afraid of another. It is a story about two different survival strategies, built centuries apart, now colliding in a rapidly changing ocean. One predator built its dominance through speed, intelligence, and teamwork. The other built its dominance through patience, poison, and time itself. Down in the freezing dark beneath the Arctic ice, that standoff is still playing out right now, in water almost no human has ever seen. And somewhere in that darkness, an ancient shark that has already outlived kings, empires, and entire centuries of human history, keeps drifting forward, one slow inch at a time, daring the ocean's smartest killer to finally figure out its secret. Off the coast of South Africa, near a town called Gansbaai, something began happening that would eventually rewrite everything scientists thought they understood about the ocean's food chain. Between February and June of 2017, 5 great white shark bodies washed up on the beach. 4 of them had been cut open with strange precision, and in every single case, one organ was missing: the liver. At first, this baffled marine biologists. Great white sharks sit near the very top of their own food chain. Almost nothing hunts a full-grown great white. Yet here were multiple carcasses, opened with what looked like surgical accuracy, drained of their most valuable organ, and left behind like discarded packaging. The answer turned out to be 2 specific orcas, a pair of adult males first spotted off Cape Town back in 2015. Whale watching operators nicknamed them port and starboard, named for their unusual dorsal fins. One collapsed to the left, the other collapsed to the right, making the 2 easy to identify every time they appeared. These 2 orcas were not part of some massive coordinated pod. They were a duo working together, apparently specialising in exactly one target: great white sharks. What happened next changed the entire ecosystem around Gansbaai. Great white sharks, one of the most feared predators in the ocean, began vanishing from the area almost entirely. Tracking data confirmed it was not coincidence. Tagged sharks that had used the region for years suddenly relocated, some abandoning the area completely, refusing to return even long after port and starboard had moved on. One marine biologist studying the pattern compared it to wild dogs fleeing when lions enter their territory. The great white sharks were not just avoiding a fight, they were treating the presence of these 2 orcas as an existential threat, something worth abandoning an entire hunting ground over. Think about how significant that is. Great white sharks are apex predators. They do not typically flee from danger. Yet here, an animal that spent millions of years evolving into one of the ocean's most efficient killers chose to disappear entirely rather than risk an encounter with 2 specific orcas. This story alone would be remarkable, but it turned out to be only the beginning. Because as researchers kept investigating, they discovered this was not some strange, isolated incident limited to 2 unusual orcas in one corner of South Africa. It was the first confirmed sighting of a hunting technique that would soon turn up on completely different coastlines, thousands of miles apart, performed by completely different orca pods that had never met port and starboard at all. Something bigger was happening across the entire ocean, and scientists were only just beginning to piece it together. If port and starboard were the only orcas on Earth doing this, you could write it off as one strange pair of animals with an unusual habit. But that is not what scientists found. In Mexico's Gulf of California, researchers filmed a completely different group of orcas performing an almost identical hunt. In August of 2020, 5 female killer whales worked together to attack a young great white shark roughly the size of a small car. Drone footage captured the entire event from above. The orcas surrounded the shark, flipped it upside down using coordinated repeated strikes, then extracted its liver before sharing the organ among the group, including calves too young to hunt on their own. Just minutes later, cameras caught the same pod attacking a second young shark, using the exact same technique. This was not a fluke. Scientists returned to that same stretch of water 2 years later, in August of 2022, and documented another orca group performing nearly the same attack on another juvenile great white. Then researchers found evidence of the same behaviour near Portland, Australia, then near California's Farallon Islands, where researchers had already been tracking great white shark movement for years using acoustic tags. In every single location, the pattern matched. Orcas targeting the liver specifically, often flipping the shark to trigger that strange paralysis called tonic immobility, then leaving most of the rest of the body behind almost untouched. Scientists studying this pattern eventually confirmed genetic evidence in Australia too, testing DNA collected directly from bite wounds on a stranded shark carcass. The results matched killer whale DNA precisely at the primary bite site, confirming beyond doubt that this was not scavenging by another animal after the fact. This was a deliberate, targeted kill. Here is what makes this discovery so important for our entire investigation into the Greenland shark. This proves, with hard genetic and video evidence, that orca pods across 3 completely separate oceans have independently developed, or somehow learned, an almost identical surgical hunting technique against a toxic-prone, dangerous apex predator shark. They are not simply overpowering these sharks through brute force, they are using precision, immobilization, careful extraction of one specific energy-dense organ while leaving behind everything that offers less nutritional value or more risk. One researcher tracking this behavior noted something crucial. This precise technique appears specific to certain orca groups that have specifically learned it, not something every orca pod on Earth automatically knows how to do. That detail matters enormously. It confirms this is learned behavior, not blind instinct, exactly the kind of skill that spreads slowly across a species through teaching, generation after generation, exactly the pattern we explored earlier with Pacific sleeper sharks. Which brings us back, finally, to the shark we started this entire journey with. If orcas across 3 oceans have already proven they can flip, immobilize, and surgically extract the liver from one of the most feared sharks in the entire ocean, the Greenland shark's 500-year-old chemical defense suddenly looks a lot less permanent than it once did. Let's look closely at exactly how orcas pull off this surgical hunt, because the technique itself reveals something important about intelligence in the animal kingdom. Step 1 involves the flip. When an orca pod locks onto a shark, whether a great white or a smaller related species, they work together to physically turn the shark upside down. This is not accidental or clumsy. Researchers watching drone footage describe the maneuvering as consistent and efficient, with repeated coordinated strikes clearly aimed at achieving one specific outcome. That outcome is tonic immobility, a strange, trance-like paralysis that many sharks enter automatically when flipped onto their back. Scientists are not entirely sure why this reflex evolved in sharks, but once triggered, it leaves the animal essentially frozen and defenseless for a minute or more. That single minute changes everything. For a hunter as fast and precise as an orca, 60 seconds of a paralyzed, defenseless target is more than enough time to work. Step 2 involves the extraction itself. Rather than simply tearing the shark apart randomly, orcas target one very specific area, typically near the pectoral fin, close to where the liver sits inside the body. Researchers examining shark carcasses in South Africa found the wound pattern strikingly consistent across multiple victims, describing it as a large, clean opening near the shoulder area, precisely where an attacker would need to strike to access the liver without wasting time or energy on other, less valuable organs. Some scientists studying this behavior believe the orcas may even use pressure and controlled movement to help the liver essentially slide out of the body once the surrounding tissue has been opened, almost like carefully unwrapping a package rather than violently destroying it. Step 3, perhaps the most surprising part, involves sharing. In multiple recorded incidents, once the liver was successfully extracted, orcas were observed passing the organ between different pod members, including calves too young to have participated in the hunt itself. This detail carries enormous weight. Sharing a valuable resource like this is not simply about feeding the group. It is very likely also a teaching moment, allowing younger orcas to directly experience, taste, and eventually learn the value of this specific hunting technique, reinforcing exactly the kind of generational knowledge transfer we discussed earlier. Put all 3 steps together, and you get something remarkable. A coordinated, repeatable, teachable hunting method specifically evolved to defeat one of the ocean's most dangerous defensive traits, a shark's own body and instincts turned against it through precise, learned manipulation. This is not brute force hunting. This is closer to a surgical procedure, refined across multiple encounters, multiple locations, and quite possibly multiple generations of orcas passing the exact same knowledge forward. And once you understand a technique this sophisticated already exists in the wild, confirmed by video and genetic evidence across 3 separate oceans, the final question of this entire investigation becomes impossible to ignore. If orcas can do this to a great white shark, one of the fastest, most dangerous predators in the sea, what realistically stands between that same technique and a slow, drifting, defenseless Greenland shark, half blind and moving barely faster than a person walking? Compare for a moment exactly what an orca pod faces when hunting a great white shark versus what it would face hunting a Greenland shark, and the difference becomes almost startling. A great white shark can accelerate explosively, reaching speeds over 25 miles an hour in short bursts. It has powerful jaws lined with serrated teeth capable of serious damage to anything nearby, including an orca if the hunt goes wrong. Every documented orca attack on a great white required careful coordination, repeated strikes, and precise timing specifically to avoid dangerous retaliation during the struggle. Researchers noted that orcas seem to specifically target smaller, juvenile great whites in several locations, likely because younger sharks present less risk of a serious bite during the chaotic flipping process. Now picture a Greenland shark in that exact same scenario. This is an animal that moves at roughly 1.5 miles an hour, slower than almost any large marine predator on Earth. It shows no evidence of the explosive burst speed a great white can produce. Its vision is often already impaired by parasites clinging to its eyes. It has no history of aggressive retaliation against much larger animals, and its entire survival strategy for 500 years has apparently relied on almost never needing to fight anything at all. If flipping a fast, aggressive, powerful predator like a great white shark is something orcas have already mastered across 3 different oceans, the physical challenge of flipping a slow, half-blind, non-aggressive Greenland shark should logically be far simpler by comparison. There would be no burst of speed to counter, no sudden retaliation to avoid, just a large, heavy, extremely slow-moving body drifting through open water. This detail flips our entire earlier assumption about the standoff between these two animals. If the challenge is not really speed, or strength, or danger during the hunt itself, then the true barrier standing between orcas and Greenland sharks almost certainly comes back to the one thing we identified earlier: chemistry. The toxic compounds packed throughout a Greenland shark's flesh remain the single most serious obstacle in this entire equation, far more dangerous to an orca than anything the shark itself could physically attempt during a struggle. And yet, we already know orcas have proven, repeatedly across multiple ocean basins, that a difficult, specialized hunting technique does not stay a barrier forever once a pod discovers the right method. If a pod of orcas ever specifically targets the liver of a Greenland shark, using the exact same principle, already proven successful against sleeper sharks and great whites combined, physical difficulty would likely be the smallest part of that equation. The only remaining question would be exposure, whether enough orcas, in the right freezing Arctic waters, get enough opportunities to encounter this ancient, isolated shark long enough to figure that final piece out. Real data now backs up something we only speculated about earlier. Orcas really are pushing deeper into the Arctic right now, faster than almost anyone predicted. For most of history, sea ice acted like a locked gate around huge sections of the far north. Orcas have a tall dorsal fin, sometimes reaching 6 feet on an adult male, and that fin becomes a serious liability under solid ice. If an orca swims beneath a frozen surface, that fin can catch and trap the animal before it reaches open water to breathe. For centuries, this simple physical limitation kept orcas largely locked out of areas like Hudson Bay and much of the eastern Canadian Arctic, regions where Greenland sharks and other cold water specialists lived with far less competition from outside predators. That gate is swinging open. Researchers tracking sea ice in Hudson Bay found that the open water period, the stretch of the year without solid ice cover, has already grown by roughly 35% over the past decade and a half. What used to be a 2-month window of accessible water has stretched to 3 months, and scientists studying the trend expect that number to keep climbing as the region continues warming. The result has been a measurable, well-documented surge in orca sightings across areas that historically almost never saw them. Researchers studying killer whale movement in the eastern Canadian Arctic describe this as a genuine range expansion, not just a handful of unusual sightings, but a sustained, extended seasonal presence in territory orcas simply could not reliably access before. This expansion is already reshaping the Arctic food chain in dramatic, measurable ways. Scientists estimate Arctic orcas now kill around 1,000 narwhals every single year, a number that roughly matches the entire yearly harvest taken by Inuit hunters who have relied on narwhal as a traditional food source for generations. Species like narwhals, belugas, and bowhead whales evolved for thousands of years in a predator-sparse environment, protected largely by ice rather than by any physical defense against a predator as capable as the orca. Now that natural shield is thinning out year after year. If narwhals, some of the most elusive whales in the entire Arctic, are already being hunted at this scale by expanding orca populations, it becomes much harder to imagine the Greenland shark staying isolated from this same pressure forever. This is not a hypothetical, someday scenario anymore. This is measurable, ongoing change happening across the exact waters this ancient shark calls home. The 500-year barrier that once separated these two predators was never really about size or speed or even chemistry alone. It was about ice, and that barrier is disappearing faster than almost any scientist expected just 20 years ago. Here is a detail that adds an unexpected twist to this entire story. Pushing into new Arctic territory is not risk-free for orcas either. Despite everything we have covered about their intelligence, speed, and hunting ability, orcas remain vulnerable to the very ice that once kept them out of these regions entirely. In Hudson Bay, researchers have documented several cases of orcas becoming trapped by sudden ice formation, unable to reach open water in time to breathe. In one incident, 4 killer whales died of starvation after becoming stranded through an entire winter in southeastern Hudson Bay. Scientists studying the region found that ice entrapment events like this have actually happened more frequently over the past decade than during the entire previous century combined. One researcher described this pattern in a way that sticks with you. These killer whales, an animal that fears almost nothing else in the ocean, are essentially swimming naively into a warming, shifting environment they have not yet fully adapted to understand. Their intelligence, honed over generations for hunting and navigation, has not yet caught up with how quickly this new Arctic landscape is changing beneath them. This detail matters enormously for our Greenland shark mystery, because it reveals something important about how this expansion is actually happening. Orcas are not calmly, safely strolling into new Arctic hunting grounds with full confidence. They are pushing into unfamiliar, dangerous, rapidly shifting territory, sometimes making fatal mistakes along the way. This is a species still learning the boundaries and dangers of a completely new environment in real time. That uncertainty cuts in an interesting direction for the Greenland shark's future safety. On one hand, more orcas entering Arctic waters means more potential opportunities for a pod to eventually encounter, study, and possibly learn to exploit this ancient shark's one weakness. On the other hand, the same unpredictable, dangerous ice conditions that occasionally trap and kill orcas may also limit exactly how deep, how far, and how frequently these expanding pods can safely explore the specific deep, frigid fjords where Greenland sharks spend most of their extremely long lives. In other words, this expanding standoff is not simply a story of an unstoppable predator marching toward an inevitable victory. It is a genuinely uncertain two-sided risk, playing out in real time in one of the most unpredictable environments left on the planet. And that uncertainty means the fate of this ancient survivor is not decided yet. Not by a long shot. Everything we have covered so far focuses heavily on what orcas might be capable of. But there is another side to this standoff worth considering seriously. What does the Greenland shark itself actually know or sense about this growing threat? Remember earlier, we mentioned something strange. Researchers investigating the Arctic recorded a Greenland shark suddenly swimming at unusually high speed, immediately following underwater hunting sounds detected nearby. This is remarkable, considering this species typically moves at barely 1.5 miles an hour for essentially its entire life. Something in that moment was serious enough to trigger a genuine, rare burst of urgency in an animal built almost entirely around conserving energy. This detail hints at something important. Even without direct confirmed video evidence of orcas specifically hunting Greenland sharks in the Atlantic, this ancient species may already possess some instinctive recognition of danger from large, unfamiliar predator sounds nearby. Evolution does not require centuries of repeated direct attacks to build in a defensive reflex. Sometimes a single dangerous encounter, repeated across enough individuals over enough generations, is sufficient to hardwire a startled response deep into a species' instincts. Consider also how this species reacts to other known threats. Scientists studying Greenland sharks near seal colonies have documented careful, patient stalking behavior, using camouflage and near-silent movement to avoid detection until the final moment of an ambush. This tells us the species is not simply a passive, unaware drifter. It demonstrates real behavioral flexibility, adjusting its normal slow, energy-conserving lifestyle specifically when survival requires it. If this same flexibility extends to detecting and avoiding a genuinely dangerous predator, like an expanding hungry orca pod, the Greenland shark might already be adapting in subtle, currently undocumented ways we simply have not observed yet. Perhaps by shifting slightly deeper. Perhaps by becoming more cautious near areas with increased orca activity. Perhaps through behaviour science has not even identified as a response to this specific threat. This uncertainty circles back to something we discussed earlier. The deep Arctic remains one of the least explored regions on the entire planet. Just because scientists have not documented a direct clash between these two predators does not mean the Greenland shark itself has not already noticed and quietly begun adjusting to a changing, more dangerous ocean. 500 years of survival did not happen through luck alone. It happened through constant, careful adaptation to threats that change slowly over centuries. The question now is whether this ancient survivor can adapt fast enough to threats that are suddenly changing over mere decades instead. If you want a preview of what might eventually happen to the Greenland shark, look no further than what has already happened to the great white shark in multiple parts of the world. Before port and starboard ever appeared near Gansby, great white sharks dominated that stretch of South African coastline for generations. Local dive operators built entire businesses around reliable great white sightings. Then, once these two orcas began targeting the area, everything changed within a matter of months. Great white sightings collapsed. Sharks that had used the region consistently for years simply left, and many never returned, even long after the immediate threat had passed. This pattern repeated itself with startling consistency across multiple locations once orcas arrived. Off California's Farallon Islands, researchers tracking white sharks found that even brief temporary orca visits triggered extended absences, lasting far longer than the orca's actual presence in the area. Sharks that once reliably hunted elephant seals near the islands during specific seasons simply vanished from the data for months at a time, redistributing to other, less studied hunting grounds entirely. This behaviour reveals something critical about how apex predators respond to a genuinely superior threat. Great white sharks did not stay and attempt to fight back or defend their territory. They fled, permanently reshaping their entire hunting patterns around avoiding a predator capable of ending their life within minutes. Now consider what this means for the Greenland shark, an animal with far less speed, far less aggression, and far less capacity to relocate quickly compared to a great white. If great white sharks, some of the fastest, most physically capable predators in the entire ocean, responded to orca presence with total, long-term avoidance, a much slower, more sedentary species like the Greenland shark would likely have even fewer options available if a similar threat became established in its own territory. This is not necessarily an immediate crisis. Confirmed orca predation specifically targeting actual Greenland sharks in the wild remains undocumented as of today. But the great white shark story provides a clear, scientifically confirmed blueprint for exactly what happens once orcas identify a new, learnable target within a shark species. Rapid behavioural change, widespread avoidance, permanent shifts in territory that can persist for years. If that exact pattern ever extends specifically to Greenland sharks in the Arctic, the consequences would ripple through an entire ecosystem that has depended on this ancient predator's steady, centuries-old presence for longer than written history itself. The Greenland shark is not simply a curiosity drifting alone through Arctic darkness. It plays a genuine, important role in an entire ecosystem that has quietly depended on its presence for centuries. As one of the only large apex predators capable of surviving at extreme depths in freezing Arctic water, the Greenland shark helps regulate populations of the fish, seals, and other marine life sharing its habitat. Removing or even significantly reducing a species like this from an ecosystem rarely stays contained to just that one animal. Every predator sits within a web of relationships, and pulling on one thread tends to shift the entire structure around it. Consider what happened when great white sharks began avoiding parts of the California coast due to orca presence. Researchers noted an unexpected ripple effect. Elephant seals, one of the great white's primary prey species in that region, actually benefited significantly from the shark's temporary absence, experiencing far fewer predation events during those windows. A shift in one predator's behaviour directly reshapes survival odds for an entirely different species further down the food chain. Apply that same logic to the Arctic. If Greenland sharks were ever forced to permanently avoid certain fjords or feeding grounds due to expanding orca presence, the seal populations, fish populations, and even scavenging species that currently rely on this shark's steady presence, whether as a predator or as a source of carrion, would likely experience significant cascading changes as well. There is also a slower, more subtle risk buried in this entire mystery, one we touched on earlier, but deserves emphasis here. The Greenland shark's reproductive rate is almost unbelievably slow. Females do not reach reproductive maturity until roughly 150 years old, and even after reaching maturity, their reproduction remains gradual compared to nearly every other shark species on Earth. This means any significant new pressure on this species, whether from expanding orca predation, continued fishing bycatch, or environmental disruption caused by a rapidly warming Arctic, would take an extraordinarily long time to recover from, if recovery is even possible at all on a meaningful timescale. A species that took multiple centuries to reach its current population cannot simply rebuild itself within a few decades, regardless of how effectively conservation efforts might respond. This is precisely why many marine biologists studying Arctic ecosystems view the Greenland shark's story with genuine concern, even without confirmed evidence of direct orca predation yet. This is a species already balancing on an extremely narrow margin, one where even a modest new threat could tip outcomes that took 5 centuries to establish. The mystery surrounding orcas and Greenland sharks, in other words, is not simply an interesting curiosity. It carries real stakes for an entire fragile, ancient corner of our planet's ocean. Given everything covered so far, marine biologists studying Arctic ecosystems are not simply waiting passively to see what happens next. Specific research efforts are already underway, aimed directly at understanding this evolving relationship before any crisis fully develops. Researchers tracking orca movement in the eastern Canadian Arctic use crossbow-mounted tracking beacons to follow individual whales across entire seasons, gathering data on exactly where these expanding pods travel, how deep they dive, and what prey they target along the way. This kind of tracking data is exactly what eventually revealed the dramatic increase in narwhal predation across the region. And similar tracking could eventually reveal whether orca pods begin spending unusual amounts of time near known Greenland shark habitats. Other scientists focus specifically on genetic testing, the same method that confirmed killer whale DNA on a stranded shark carcass in Australia. If a Greenland shark carcass ever washes ashore anywhere in the North Atlantic, with injuries matching the precise liver extraction pattern already documented in great whites and sleeper sharks, genetic testing could confirm within days whether an orca was responsible, even without a single direct video observation of the attack itself. There is also a growing effort to simply expand the amount of underwater observation happening in extreme Arctic environments. Remotely operated vehicles, essentially underwater robots equipped with cameras, have already provided some of the only direct video footage scientists currently have of living Greenland sharks in their natural deep-sea habitat. As this technology becomes more affordable and more widely used, the odds of eventually capturing a direct, undeniable video interaction between these two predators continues climbing every single year. Perhaps most valuably, researchers are increasingly working directly with Inuit hunters and indigenous communities who have lived alongside these Arctic waters for countless generations. Local knowledge passed down through direct, repeated observation over centuries often reveals patterns and behaviours that short-term scientific expeditions alone would take decades to notice. Indigenous hunters have already provided crucial first-hand reports confirming increased orca presence in areas where the animals historically never appeared, information that has directly shaped how scientists understand this entire Arctic shift. Combine expanding tracking technology, genetic testing capability, deep-sea camera access, and generations of local observational knowledge, and the odds of finally solving this 500-year mystery keep improving with each passing research season. This is not a question that will likely remain unanswered forever. Given how quickly the Arctic itself is changing, and how quickly scientific tools for observing it continue improving, the true nature of this standoff between the ocean's smartest hunter and its most ancient survivor may finally reveal itself within our own lifetimes. Before we move toward the final parts of this story, There is one more strange detail about the Greenland shark worth understanding, because it adds an unexpected layer to this entire mystery. This shark rarely swims alone. Most Greenland sharks carry small, pale, worm-like parasites attached directly to their corneas, called Omatacoita elongata. These tiny creatures latch onto the shark's eyes and remain there for essentially the shark's entire adult life, gradually damaging the cornea and leaving behind scar tissue with each new infection. Over enough years, this parasite likely leaves many adult Greenland sharks partially or almost completely blind. For years, scientists assumed this parasite was purely harmful, a random hitchhiker weakening an already strange ancient animal. But some researchers have proposed a genuinely fascinating alternative explanation. In near total darkness, where normal vision provides almost no useful advantage anyway, these small parasites might actually function as a strange kind of built-in fishing lure. Some evidence suggests these parasites can produce a faint glow, potentially attracting small, curious fish close enough for the slow-moving shark to capture them with minimal effort. If true, this transforms what looks like a purely negative infection into a bizarre survival advantage, another layer in this shark's already extreme list of unusual adaptations. An animal that cannot chase fast prey, but that might use a glowing parasite attached to its own eye as bait, drawing prey directly toward its motionless, waiting jaws. This detail matters for our broader mystery too, because it reinforces something we have circled back to throughout this entire investigation. The Greenland shark did not simply survive 500 years through one single defense mechanism, it survived through an entire interconnected system of strange, extreme adaptations working together. Toxic flesh throughout its body, camouflaged patient ambush hunting near sleeping seals, extreme cold and pressure resistance built into its very cells, and possibly, incredibly, even a parasite riding along on its own eyeball, repurposed into a hunting tool rather than simply tolerated as a burden. Very few animals on Earth demonstrate this level of layered, interconnected survival strategy, stacked one on top of another across centuries of extreme adaptation. It reinforces exactly why this species has proven so difficult for any predator, including the ocean's smartest hunter, to fully solve. Every layer of defense buys this ancient shark more time, and time, more than anything else in this entire story, has always been the Greenland shark's greatest weapon. By this point in the story, it is worth stepping back and reconsidering the entire premise we started with. We began this investigation asking a simple question. Why do orcas refuse to hunt the Greenland shark? But the deeper we have gone, the more that original framing starts to feel incomplete, maybe even slightly misleading. Orcas do not appear to avoid this shark purely out of fear. The same instinctive avoidance a smaller prey animal might show toward a genuine predator. We have already established that orcas sit comfortably at the very top of the ocean's food chain, facing essentially no natural predators of their own anywhere on Earth. True fear, in the traditional sense, may not even be the correct lens for understanding how this specific apex predator approaches a slow, toxic, unusual shark like this one. Instead, everything we have uncovered throughout this investigation points towards something closer to calculated respect. Orcas across 3 separate oceans have already proven, through confirmed video and genetic evidence, that they are fully capable of solving an almost identical biological puzzle, precisely extracting a valuable, energy-rich liver from dangerous, toxic prone shark species while avoiding the more hazardous parts of the body entirely. If the Greenland shark remains largely untouched today, the most likely explanation is not that orcas cannot handle this challenge. It is that the specific combination of extreme isolation, limited historical access due to sea ice, and simple efficiency, choosing easier, more accessible prey when available, has kept these two predators from crossing paths often enough for that same learned technique to fully develop and spread specifically toward this species. That equation, as we have covered extensively, is now shifting. Rapidly, sea ice barriers are dissolving, orca range is expanding into territory it historically could not reach. The same intelligence and generational teaching that cracked the code on Pacific sleeper sharks and great white sharks alike remains fully capable of eventually cracking this final code too, given enough time, opportunity and exposure. This reframes the entire relationship between these two ancient survivors. Not a story of one predator being simply too dangerous for another to touch. A story of two different survival strategies, one built on speed and coordinated intelligence, the other built on patience and centuries of extreme chemical adaptation, existing in a delicate temporary balance that a rapidly changing Arctic is actively beginning to disrupt. Respect in nature rarely lasts forever unchallenged, and the challenge to this particular 500-year standoff may already be closer than most people realize. Let's return, one final time, to the core defense that has protected this species longer than any written human record. Because understanding exactly what this shark's toxicity actually accomplishes reveals something profound about survival itself. The Greenland shark did not evolve to fight. It did not evolve to outrun danger. Every adaptation we have covered throughout this entire investigation points toward one single unifying strategy: become the worst possible meal available, so thoroughly and so consistently that almost nothing bothers trying to eat you in the first place. This is a genuinely rare survival strategy in the animal kingdom, especially at this extreme scale. Plenty of small creatures use toxicity as a defense: brightly colored frogs, certain insects, various small fish. But applying that same defensive principle to an animal reaching 18 feet long, rivaling some of the largest sharks on the entire planet, represents something far more unusual. This is not a small, vulnerable creature hiding behind poison as its only option. This is one of the largest predators in its entire ecosystem, choosing toxicity as a deliberate evolutionary trade-off, sacrificing speed and aggression almost entirely in exchange for a body that actively punishes anything careless enough to attack it. That trade-off appears to have worked spectacularly well for roughly 500 years. No confirmed natural predator has been documented successfully, repeatedly hunting adult Greenland sharks throughout recorded scientific history. Very few animals on the planet can claim a defensive record anywhere close to that. But as we have thoroughly established throughout this investigation, being a bad meal does not guarantee permanent safety, especially against a predator intelligent enough to identify precisely which small portion of that meal remains genuinely valuable and safe to extract. Orcas have already proven, across 3 separate oceans, that toxicity and danger throughout most of an animal's body does not stop a sufficiently patient, sufficiently coordinated hunter from surgically removing exactly the one valuable piece worth taking. If that same precise calculation ever fully extends to the Greenland shark specifically, 500 years of chemical defense would not disappear overnight, but it would face its first genuinely serious test in the entire recorded history of this remarkable species. The shark built the perfect defense for a world where nothing hunting it was smart enough to work around that defense. The uncomfortable question now facing this ancient survivor is whether that specific world still exists today, or whether it is already quietly slipping away, one melting mile of Arctic ice at a time. To fully appreciate just how unusual the Greenland shark's position really is, it helps to remember exactly how few animals in the entire ocean can claim any real safety from an orca at all. Blue whales, the largest animals to have ever existed on planet Earth, 4 times longer than a school bus and weighing as much as roughly 30 elephants combined, have still fallen victim to coordinated orca attacks. Sperm whales, among the deepest diving mammals in the ocean, capable of descending thousands of feet to hunt giant squid in total darkness, have been documented being harassed and attacked by orcapods as well. Even other apex predators, animals that sit at the very top of their own individual food chains, including great white sharks and whale sharks, have proven vulnerable once an orcapod decides to specifically target them. Against this backdrop, the Greenland shark's continued safety looks even more remarkable by comparison. This is not simply one more large animal that happens to be difficult for orcas to catch. This is one of the only creatures in the entire ocean that appears to have found a genuine, lasting exception to what is otherwise an almost universal rule. Nearly everything large enough to interest an orca eventually becomes vulnerable to one. The Greenland shark's exception exists specifically because of that unique combination we have explored throughout this entire journey. Toxic, layered chemical defenses built from centuries of extreme cold adaptation, extreme isolation in some of the least explored, least accessible water on the entire planet, and, until very recently, a natural ice barrier that physically prevented most orca populations from ever reaching this shark's remote territory, in meaningful numbers at all. Remove any single piece of that combination, and the entire balance shifts. We have already seen orcas overcome toxic defenses in closely related shark species on the other side of the planet. We have already seen that ice barrier rapidly dissolving as the Arctic warms faster than nearly anywhere else on Earth. The isolation that once protected this ancient survivor represents the final and perhaps most fragile piece of its 500-year-old defensive puzzle. Every other ocean giant eventually learned to fear the orca's teeth, intelligence, and relentless coordinated persistence. The Greenland shark remains one of the last true exceptions left in the entire ocean. Whether it stays that way may depend less on the shark's own defenses and more on how quickly the frozen world protecting it continues to disappear. As we near the end of this investigation, it is worth clearly naming exactly what this entire 500-year standoff actually represents. Not simply two predators avoiding each other by chance, two fundamentally different philosophies of survival, tested against each other in one of the most extreme environments on the entire planet. Orcas represent power, refined through intelligence, communication, and generations of carefully taught technique. Every hunt is an active demonstration of capability, speed combined with precision, strength combined with teamwork so coordinated it resembles a planned military operation more than typical animal behavior. Their entire survival strategy revolves around one central idea: become capable of overcoming almost anything the ocean can offer through sheer combined ability. The Greenland shark represents something almost entirely opposite: patience, refined not through action, but through centuries of near-total stillness. Every year this shark survives is not a demonstration of ability in the traditional sense. It is simply another year of successfully avoiding conflict altogether, another year of a chemical defense proving sufficient, another year added to an already unimaginable lifespan built specifically around wasting as little energy and taking as few risks as possible. Neither strategy is inherently superior to the other. Both have proven remarkably successful, in their own completely different ways, across an almost unbelievable span of time. Orcas dominate through action in nearly every corner of the ocean they inhabit. The Greenland shark endures through stillness in one of the most extreme, isolated corners of that same ocean. What makes this particular story so genuinely compelling is watching these two opposing philosophies collide, slowly, in real time, as a rapidly warming Arctic forces them into increasingly close proximity after centuries of relative separation. This is not a dramatic, sudden clash playing out in a single afternoon. It is a slow, quiet, pressure-building gradually across changing sea ice, expanding orca territory, and a shark that has never before needed to develop a serious countermeasure against a predator this capable. Power built the ocean's smartest hunter. Patience built its most ancient survivor. And somewhere beneath the Arctic ice right now, in water almost no human has ever directly observed, that ancient contest between power and patience continues playing out, exactly as it may have quietly played out for the past 500 years. We started this journey with a simple question: why do orcas refuse to hunt the Greenland shark? After everything we have uncovered, the honest answer turns out to be far more layered and far more fascinating than any single explanation could capture on its own. Part of the answer lies in chemistry, a body built from centuries of extreme cold adaptation that happens to double as one of the most effective natural defenses in the entire ocean. Part of the answer lies in geography, an animal isolated for centuries in some of the coldest, deepest, least accessible water on the planet, protected as much by ice and distance as by any single biological trait. Part of the answer lies in simple efficiency, a smart, adaptable predator, choosing easier, safer meals when better options remain available nearby. But perhaps the most important part of the answer lies in something we only fully understood by looking elsewhere in the ocean entirely. Orcas have already proven, across 3 separate oceans with both video and genetic evidence, that a toxic, dangerous shark's defenses are not actually permanent obstacles. They are puzzles. Puzzles that a sufficiently intelligent, sufficiently patient predator eventually learns to solve, then teaches to its young, then spreads slowly across generations until an entire population carries forward a skill that once seemed impossible. The Greenland shark has not yet faced that exact puzzle, being solved specifically against its own species, at least not according to any confirmed scientific evidence available today. But every single piece protecting this ancient survivor, isolation, ice, and limited exposure is actively eroding, faster than almost any prediction made just a couple decades ago. This is where our investigation ends, not with a clean, final answer, but with something arguably more compelling. A genuine, unresolved mystery still playing out right now in real time in one of the last truly unexplored corners of our entire planet. Somewhere beneath the Arctic ice, an animal that has already outlived kings, empires, and centuries of human civilization keeps drifting forward, one impossibly slow inch at a time, carrying defenses built across 500 years of quiet evolutionary refinement. And somewhere in that same freezing darkness, the ocean's most intelligent hunter continues expanding its reach, generation by generation, pod by pod, into territory it could barely access just a few decades ago. Whether these two ancient forces ever fully collide, or whether the Greenland shark's extraordinary defenses continue holding for another 500 years, remains one of the true open questions left in modern ocean science. Somewhere down there, in water almost no human eye has ever seen, that answer is already unfolding. We simply have not been watching long enough yet to know how the story ends.